Hello, and welcome back to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Jedediah Thomas. Jedediah Thomas is the mind master, self-proclaimed. We're going to find out throughout the course of this conversation why and how. He's come recommended by one of my partners, and he's seen great change. And I'm very curious to understand how people can gain greater self mastery, greater self awareness. Because at the end of the day, the only thing we really have any modicum of control over is us and how we choose to respond. And even that's up for debate, depending on which side of the philosophical and neuroscientific side of the line you sit. So, Jed, thank you very much for coming along today. Could you give us a couple of minutes on your history so that people understand how you got to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me on, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be here. Basically, my journey of starting to become a healer started 9 years ago when I had basically the biggest trauma of my life. My whole life got turned upside down. My entire self-identity, self-esteem completely decimated. I had no sense of up or down. Like I was so traumatized, I was staring at a wall for like weeks at a time. Like that's how far gone
Yeah.
mentally I was. And over, say, about the next 7 or 8 years, I tried literally everything I could think of to fix that, right? I tried normal CBT therapy. I tried like Marissa Peer RRT. I tried hypnosis. I tried like basically any modality that you can think of. I've tried it, or, at least one of my clients has, and nothing worked. And so basically, I kind of gave up on healing and just accepted the fact that I was completely broken and would never be fixed. And then about just over a year ago, so not last December, but the December before last, I decided to become a mindset coach. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I'd studied all this different modalities and whatnot, from the most practical to the most woo-woo. And I said, well, maybe I can help someone, right? I couldn't help myself, but maybe I can help someone else. And so it was actually Marco, who you mentioned, was actually my first client. And in the process of helping him in the first couple sessions, I invented my own methodology that actually worked. And it ended up working so well. It not only fixed him, but I was able to fix myself, and I was able to fix other people on levels that they had never even seen before. So it's just kind of like I wouldn't say it's an accident, but it was a very, very unusual way to get into doing what I'm doing.
That's been my business model for the last 20 years, which is find people who are broken just like me and get paid to fix us both. So I now quite happily market and brand myself as being the object lesson. You don't have to make the same mistakes. You can be idiotic in completely different ways. Okay. So tell me this. What is the belief that people come to you with about themselves, about what's possible, what's not?
So there's kind of two camps of people that I work on. And one of those camps is basically they're very similar to me. They know they have a problem. They know they're broken. They've tried everything you can think of to fix themselves and nothing worked. Right. And so their biggest belief is that it's not actually possible to be healed. Right. Like they don't even know that you can actually get back to normal after being through what a lot of people have been through, or perhaps normal for the first time if they've been, grew up in childhood abuse or whatever. And then the other camp of people, they don't actually know that they have a problem because they're the type of people that buries all of the problems that they have. And basically, they don't realize there's a problem until they reach a crisis situation, and then their whole life falls apart. And then they realize that they have a problem. So I'm partly wanting to try and catch those people before they go off the cliff that they don't even know is there.
Understood. And again, that's a very similar audience to me, where these are people who are succeeding towards self destruction. And it's marked by creeping isolation, erosion of trust, and eventually being actively avoided because they overemphasize the live fast, die young, make a good looking corpse kind of mentality, the more is better mindset, which is just a terrible lie. Better is better, and more is just more. Then when things don't work out, it's not me, it's you. So they blame and they become more and more selfish. And before you know it, because their fundamental human needs are met, they override their value system and they become entitled. then they become entitled and feel like they deserve better. And when it doesn't happen, they burn bridges. And before you know it, they've undervalued all the relationships. And people lose patience because they just haven't contributed. It's just been take, take, take. And that pathway is encouraged by so many businesses. I don't know what your condition was that caused you to have that burnout, but in many cases, I'm seeing it in management levels where over 60% are suffering from some form of health related condition that is work and stress induced, that is entirely preventable. So I'm really curious, what needs to change in terms of our thinking about what the role of work is and the employer and the employee?
It's a great question. So, me and jobs, they don't really mix very well. So, I kind of ended up as an entrepreneur by accident as well, just because like I hate working for people. I hate being controlled. So I've always kind of seen jobs as kind of a means to an end, which is that I have my own personal goals in life. I have, things that I'm trying to accomplish, and I'll work for, somewhere. If I need to make a certain amount of money a certain amount of time, I know I can get this type of job and do that. Or if I need to learn a certain specific skill set, I can go work at a job and do that. And so basically my whole focus is on personal growth, right? And so what I'm not saying is don't be just like jump around from company to company all the time, but you have to not take your own self out of the equation, right? You're living not for other people, not for your employer, but for yourself. And you have to understand where your employer fits into your own personal goals.
Absolutely. In my analysis, I think, in fact, I believe what people seek is choice, purpose, and relationships.
Yeah.
And again, like you, I'm unemployable and fireproof. That's how I've ended up working for myself. But part of the reason for that is I wanted to do things in a way that felt congruent with my value system. I didn't put my finger on that, but it always jarred with me where I was asked to do things I know were wrong. They felt morally reprehensible. Putting someone under pressure, lying to convince somebody to buy, putting somebody under pressure to behave in a way that would mean that they would be jeopardizing a relationship or putting their trust and their reputation on the line.
Mhm.
That to me feels broken in an immoral way. And I'm not moralizing here, but it just feels like I have no right to take advantage of a situation where someone else suffers, where they don't have to, because I think we can be kind as leaders, we can be kind as managers, we can be kind as sellers. But by and large, we're anything but. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. The human element is what's missing in everything. And so people tend to think, oh, I can either do this or I can be human. I can go to work or I can be human. I can do XYZ or follow my conscience and be a human. And they don't realize that like you start with being a human. You apply that to everything that you're doing, your morality, your empathy, your relationships, everything. And then that actually makes everything more effective. But our society is so against that because everything is so segmented. They see like making money is separate from relationships, which is separate from your home life, which is separate from your values, from all of this stuff. And it just gets, it's like when you have a mirror and it's whole and then you break the mirror and then it's in fragments. That's kind of how our society is. It's like you might have one sliver, but then you don't have all the other slivers.
Again, I absolutely agree. And what I'm seeing is we need to rethink what meaningful work is, what productive work is, because a conversation with a future customer when they are not ready to buy is not a waste of time.
Mhm.
But in most sales organizations, it would be treated as if you're wasting your time, move on, find someone else who's ready to buy. Well, that's a product of broken thinking. It's treating human relationships, which is how sales has always been done historically, like a pin factory. The reality is that, especially in really tough markets, as we're probably moving into, and this is going to be my eighth recession, and I've done some pretty dreadful things. I've seen some really awful things done. And the expectations of leadership and management when they're behind on their numbers then makes them self-serving and venal. And it creates the conditions where it's hellish to work there. And I think we're probably on the cusp of a second great resignation, certainly from the conversations I'm having with Gen Z and millennial prospects and clients. They're all starting side gigs. They're all looking for new jobs. They all distrust their employer. That's a terrible state of affairs. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about your thoughts because you describe yourself as a healer. Let's start with the process of healing the whole human being and then looking at that as a metaphor for the organization, the system that is a business and the ecosystem in which it lives. I think the parallels are very stark. So, talk to me about healing.
Yeah. So specifically as it applies to society, it actually does mirror what happens inside of us very directly. So when we are threatened, the more we are threatened, the more we only focus on what's right in front of us. If there's a dinosaur right in front of us, our entire attention is on that dinosaur. If it's a few hundred feet away, okay, we have a little bit more focus around us, but that's still pretty prominent. But if we don't see a dinosaur at all, we don't focus on it. And it's very similar to how businesses are run, how the economy works. You go through a bull cycle, there's abundance and everyone sees far into the future and everything looks great. And then something goes wrong and everyone starts getting threatened. And then the fear creeps in, and then everyone says, oh my gosh, I just have to look at what's right in front of me right now. And so our ability to actually see into the future and build the future is directly inversely related to the amount of threat that we feel at any given time. And so the more we open ourselves up and fill ourselves with love and abundance, then the more we can actually build that future. Whereas the more we're affected by the threats that are immediately around us, then we can't even see the future at all. Like we're just like our brain shuts off completely.
I'm going to back you up, but I'm going to look at
Okay.
it through a different lens. And the lens is that of how a brain responds under stress versus when it feels safe. And
Mhm.
this is the binary process of selling. I've just spent the last 7 years preparing for this moment because I've seen it coming. Because history has a very nasty habit of repeating itself. The last 16 years mirrored the 1920s and 1930s with alarming similarities and alacrity. The net result of that is that didn't end well. And I'm a bit of a curmudgeon. So my thinking is it's probably going to happen again. And you prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but hope isn't a very good strategy. I prefer to be prepared. And what I've realized over the years is the evergreen strategy that works time and time again is to be a decent human being. It's to be in service of others. It's to care about their outcome and put their needs before yours. It's to give them genuine cause to believe that you have their back and you are their ally. Well, this is simple neuroscience. If your brain, when it associates itself with me and remembers me or sees my number come up on caller ID, and the last 7, 8, 12 times, your brain has been left with dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. You'll pick up that call willingly and you'll engage in a bilateral conversation. So it's two-way. If the last time I spent digging for your pain in order to serve myself to try and uncover your budget, uncover whether you have authority, uncover your need, uncover your timescales to buy my product, I'm sending signal after signal to your brain that my interests come before yours. So this simple shift, do I think you win, then I win as a symptom? Or do I think I win first, then you can win? because they sound and look quite similar until the end of the quarter when you're behind.
Right. That's the truth.
Then the experience is different. And then you go to, I win, you win, or I win, I don't really care whether you win or not, as long as I don't lose, to I win, you lose. And you're going to see a lot of those last two in recession.
Right.
As the market tightens up, people discount prematurely and needlessly. They lie, they exaggerate, they omit, they put people under pressure. And the more they put people under pressure, the less effective they become because they create more perceived risk in the buyer's brain.
Right.
It's really binary.
Yeah, that actually fits perfectly, even though on the surface it sounds different, because you're focused on the long term, which, as I said, that basically means that you're not being threatened. And the reason why you're not being threatened is because of your ability to plan ahead and say, hey, things could go wrong at any time. I'm going to have a backup plan. And incidentally, that backup plan is I'm just going to be a good person. Where all of the people that live, bounce from fear to, happiness to fear to happiness just based on what's around them, they don't have that ability to plan ahead. And so therefore, when the rug gets pulled out from underneath them, then they go into panic mode. And then all of a sudden they start abusing people, trying to take because of their inability to actually see what was coming. So it all fits together. It's not that you have to fear the threat, it's that you have to see the threat coming and prepare and save yourself from the threat before it's actually right on top of you. And that way you can actually think and see the future and fix everything ahead of time.
Well, there was a meta study done, and I read this about 20 years ago, but it's so powerful, it's stuck in my head. And it was a study of 330 studies of mankind's greatest fear. And it wasn't the dentist, it wasn't public speaking, and it wasn't death. It was the future, because with it comes uncertainty. Now, this ties in very neatly with the research of a pal of mine, Dr. Daryl Stickle. And he did his PhD on creating trust in high conflict, high tension environments. And he came up with this beautiful, elegant formula. Vulnerability times uncertainty equals perceived risk. Now, why this is important for this conversation is any perception of risk triggers the brain. And if you go over someone's risk threshold, so on a scale of 1 to 100, you might have a threshold of 73, and you're okay with that up to 73. But at 74, you get triggered. Mine might be 14, and I'm okay up to 14, but when it goes to 15, I get triggered. And in both cases, we both go to the worst case scenario. So in the sale, sellers actually create the condition of anticipated buyer's remorse. Because what they do is they misread a moment in the sale when the buyer really needs a damn good listening to. And instead, they talk their way out of it by ratcheting up the pain or ratcheting up the features and benefits. But they panic. And in recession, they will panic sooner, more frequently, and needlessly. So let's get back to healing. How do we heal? How do we become whole again? Because we started out whole and then we didn't.
Yeah. So basically, every problem in our mind, doesn't matter what label you want to put on it. I'm very much at odds with, the mental health industry. Like, I don't like labeling stuff. I like fixing stuff. Everything comes down to what I call traumas and limiting beliefs. So traumas are when we experienced a situation that was so devastating, our subconscious felt like it was threatened, right? And so what it did is it created a snapshot of everything surrounding that situation, everything you saw, heard, smelled, tasted, felt, what emotions you had, who was around you, everything. There's a complete snapshot. And anything that gets you closer to that snapshot creates absolute fear and panic in your mind, right? So it will do anything it can to keep you from that snapshot, up to and including killing you in order to save you. Which sounds totally contradictory, but that's how the mind works. It's not really logical, but it's trying to save you
It's
from that trauma.
anything but logical.
It's logical in its own way. It's just not what we would call logical, according to our logical mind. But its goal is to save you from uncertainty, from death, and it does that by creating those snapshots and pulling you away. So the more something is like a snapshot, the more you'll trigger, and the more panic you'll have, the more you'll freak out. So that's the trauma side. And then you have limiting beliefs, which my definition, as we talked about, is quite a bit different than what most people say beliefs are. I go kind of like deeper than biology, but my definition of a limiting belief is basically anything that's against your will. So I want to do XYZ, and my beliefs say I have to do ABC. I'm going to do ABC because my beliefs can't allow me to do XYZ. Or maybe worse, right? I don't want to do XYZ. I would rather do ABC. And my beliefs say, no, I have to do the thing that hurts me, because it's like your beliefs are pushing you in a bad direction, or holding you back from what you want. So it's funny because you have these two systems that are kind of at ends to each other. One's trying to protect you, one's trying to like sabotage you. And then it's the interplay between those two that I work, and I can resolve all of that. And then there's like no mental tension anymore.
Understood. So this sounds very similar to the work that we do in terms of staying out of the drama triangle, which is where you get sucked into psychological gameplay, and it's always a win-lose in some form or another, either as the victim, the persecutor, or the rescuer. Whereas what we want to do is operate from the winner's triangle. In the winner's triangle, you are fully present and you are unattached to the outcome. Your attention is total. You listen deeply. Your empathy is total as well. It's not this weaponized empathy where they teach you how to do listening noises in order to try and trick someone into feeling comfortable with you. I was coaching a client this morning, actually, and we had this very robust discussion because he had this massive book of questions. And he's been watching all these videos about creating rapport, but it's all the weaponization of these things.
Yeah.
Instead of being genuinely authentic, fully present, being vulnerable, being caring and nurturing, being assertive. One of the problems as a coach, as a trainer, as a manager, and as a seller is I think what we often do is we buy a surrogate parent-child relationship. So our report comes to us and say, boss, what do you think I should do? Well, they will ultimately make the choice. But what they want to do is for us to make the choice. And it's because there is this unreasonable, impossible, unspoken contract between manager and employee, buyer and seller. So the employee's contract with the manager is, boss, I want you to hire me, pay me, look after me, grow me, develop me, coach me. When I'm down, pick me up. When I'm up, pat me on the back, reward me. And we both know that when the time is right, you should probably set a step aside, because we both know that I'm more talented and capable than you are. Now, the unreasonable, impossible contract from the manager's perspective is, I own you, your property, you're mine. Your purpose of existence is to make me successful and make me look good. When you think about my failings, they are really quite attractive, quirky little characteristics that make me lovable and adorable. And when you talk about me to other people, I'm the best manager you've ever had, definitely the best manager in this company, and possibly the best manager who's ever walked the face of this planet. Yeah. And we're completely at odds because we've created this parent-child surrogacy. What we need to do is create genuine adult to adult grown-up conversations, contracts with one another, where I make a commitment to you and I am accountable to keep my commitment. And you absolutely have the right to hold my feet to the fire because we're grown-ups. And I think that's part of the thing that's missing that puts us into that self-destructive mode. So I'm curious, again, in terms of your experience of how people play the victim, then start blaming and attacking. And their byline is, I was only trying to help. I'm doing my best.
Yeah. So I think the distinction here is that even though it looks like they're playing the victim, the reality is they don't really have a choice. So, one of the specific things about traumas is that a piece of you stays in that situation forever, right? Until it's fixed. And
Mhm.
so, a lot of our traumas happened, between 0 and 7 years old, not all of them, but a lot of them. And so, parts of us are still that little child, and we don't know how to operate in the adult world because that part of our subconscious is completely cut off from the rest of us. And it's very similar with limiting beliefs. Is a lot of those beliefs that we adopted when we were kids, they apply when you're in a parental situation, but they do not apply in the real world. And so your subconscious cannot tell the difference between childhood and adulthood. Time does not mean anything to the subconscious. And so you're actually going into the world looking like an adult, but you're actually still a child in very many ways. And so in these situations that trigger all of that stuff that's already there, you are disempowered. And it's not like you're acting like the victim. It's not like you're trying to lower yourself. It's like your subconscious is making you do that because of the programs that are already there that you didn't have a choice in putting there.
A lot of this, again, what we teach is a lot of transactional analysis. And in TA, the idea is that from the age of 0 to 6, you've got this tape running on permanent record,
Mhm.
and then it switches off recording, and then it's just on permanent loop in the background. And so we inherit lots of beliefs. Our trauma comes with us. Our belief system goes back 75 years before our birth, because on top of my shoulders are my parents. And that was a pretty interesting relationship. And then my grandparents. My parents grew up, they were 1 year old. Both of them were 1 year old when the Second World War broke out. And they were in Malta. And from the age of 1 till 5, they were being bombed.
Mhm.
And what was really interesting is, now that my mother is 86, 88, she's now reliving a lot of this stuff. And so her trauma was never, ever dealt with. So I'm starting to see now why I'm so messed up, which is really very interesting, because that reflection, you start to suddenly realize, oh, Lord, what else have I
Yeah,
done?
it's interesting because I actually kind of diverge from normal theory here. So normal theory is basically exactly what you said. From 0 to 6, 0 to 7, whatever date you want to put on it, you're basically on record. After that, you're just on repeat. I don't believe that that's entirely true. Yes, a lot of your problems come about from that time period. As I said earlier, every single thing comes down to traumas and limiting beliefs. And your subconscious doesn't know the difference whether you're a child, whether you're adult. So if you get traumatized tomorrow, it will have just as much impact on you as when you were 3 years old, right?
I
Or
think
if you
that's
develop a
fair.
limiting belief tomorrow, same effect as when you were 3 years old. So what they're doing is reducing us to basically recordings of past generations. And that's not what we are as human beings. We actually have the power to change that. And we do change that all the time. Like your beliefs now were not the beliefs you had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You're a totally different person, right? So to say that we only operate from our first 6 years of life is very much going in the wrong direction because there's a lot more to the picture.
Uh, Absolutely. If I gave that impression, then I take it back. That's where the foundational recordings come from. Then what we have is our experience through adolescence, early work. By the time we're in our mid 20s, I think a lot of our positions have already been formed. And then the heuristics start to really be well embedded. So our biases, our bad habits. So for me, my neighbor asked if I wouldn't mind taking some of the ivy down off the fence. And I was completely blind to the stuff right in front of me. And I
Mhm,
went to the stuff in the corner. I've cleared that stuff out completely. I was
mhm.
diligent as a neighbor, but I only just noticed this morning, and that's 6 days after I did the clearing up, that there's another patch of ivy, which is probably the one that she meant. Being able to recognize that and have an opportunity to look in the mirror And self-reflection, I think, is something that we really do need to do, because that is where choice comes. Because I think most of the time we're on autopilot. And that's why that scripting, those recordings are so potent. Then those traumas and all the other baggage that we've picked up. But you're absolutely right, because someone may just suddenly take it out on a minority, for example. That would be a great example in this current environment, because they were cut up by someone with a Mexican number plate. And all of a sudden, because they've had all that background, then that triggers them. That's probably not who they are intrinsically, but there's a buildup. And I think I'm really curious, because a lot of healing appears to be enabled in self-awareness and being able to question ourselves. And I don't think anywhere near enough of that is really developed and taught in childhood or at work. And I'd be curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that's the start of the healing path, is becoming self-aware. Like, who am I really? Who do I want to be? Who am I because of these programs that I don't want to be, right? And you're actually kind of looking at the patterns that are in your life, the thought patterns, all of this stuff is like, hey, something is seriously wrong here that I didn't notice before because I've just been running on autopilot. So that's absolutely the start of it. But the issue is that no matter how self-aware you are, you cannot fix a trauma yourself. You cannot fix a limiting belief yourself, because they are a very different thing. Like, they are a permanent thing that gets stuck to you, that no matter how self-aware you are, you can't change. That's why people spend 20, 30 years in therapy becoming aware of their problems, and they never fix their problems, because all it is awareness. And what I do is I actually go in and change that stuff, and it goes away completely.
Right. Okay. So you're going and working at a neural pathway level, trying
Yes.
to help people change their response to a given trigger.
No. So that's what everybody else does, is they change the response to a trigger. I get rid of the trigger completely.
Right. Okay.
So when I'm done with you, you don't have to cope. You don't have to do therapy. You don't have to do breath work. You don't have to do meditation, because there is nothing to do. It's like a blank slate. Not in a bad way. I don't brainwash you.
No. Well, again, if you are at a blank slate, then you have a choice what
Yeah.
you put on the slate. I love the idea of that. Let's dig a little bit deeper then. So, how does that work in practice?
So, as an example, I had a client, we did just one trauma removal. So, this client had been, had a pornography addiction for, I don't know, 20, 30 years from childhood, right? And it was taking over their life, it was affecting their marriage. And I went in and I took out one trauma that was the source of that. And that all of that went away like overnight. They no longer had an addiction. They no longer even felt attracted to it, because all of that was a trauma response. So once I got rid of the trauma, then all of the symptoms disappear. So basically, contrast that with what everyone else does. Everyone else says, okay, this trigger is here and you can't do anything about it. We're going to help you think a different way about it, or cope a different way, or change your behavior to facilitate your life around that trigger. And I'm saying, no, that's crazy. I'm just going to get rid of the trigger. Right. So like
Okay.
every problem that you have in your life is because of some subconscious program causing that problem. And so, yeah.
Very interesting. I come at it from a slightly different perspective. And again, I've got to give credit to a solution focused therapist partner of mine, Jin Lally.
Mhm.
She's a therapist that doesn't care about your problems, doesn't want to talk about them at all. And when you apply the same principle to selling, it's fascinating, because you don't need to talk about or remind people of their pain, because when you focus them on the outcome that they want and the solution that they want to create, and then you help them build a clear path that they believe they are capable of exercising choice and agency over and making happen, then they stop doing the things that are causing those problems in the first place. And the trauma doesn't surface. Now, I'm guessing, personally, I would take a belts and braces approach and eliminate both the source of it, but then consistently focus on the outcome that people want. When I've implemented this as a methodology, I'm now running at 22 in a row. And each time it started with someone objecting with something like, this will never work in the real world, which is a wonderful irony. But by not focusing on the problem and focusing on what people do want, then what we do is we get their attention where it needs to be, which is on the outcome that they're trying to create. And I'm really curious how the work that you're doing facilitates creating that pathway to that certain better future.
So that kind of fits under the umbrella of behavioral health. This is why I'm at odds with behavioral health, because they are focused so much on your behavior, on that outcome, which is good, right? You do want an outcome, but they fix the outcome without fixing the reason for why that outcome was not right to begin with. And so what you do is you have people that start functioning better in society on a surface level, but inside there's still that problem, that's still that program there that's running. And at any point it can get re-triggered and then everything goes off the railroad, right? So you have people that are like in Alcoholics Anonymous for 10, 20 years, something happens and then boom, all of their progress is gone overnight, right? And so what my focus is, I actually want to fix the problem and then the outcome is automatic. And so, yes, I care about your outcome, but it's a byproduct of actually fixing the reason why the outcome was a problem in the first place. And so with focusing on behavior, basically focusing on the outcome instead of the problem is actually what a lot of people do. And that's the people that are in that second group of people that I was talking about, is that they don't actually realize they have a problem because they're burying, ignoring, focus on everything else. And then because the mind is electric, at some point it flips that circuit breaker, right? Like what you're just talking about, level 14 problem, 15 is now a problem. And then, whatever, like it happens in an instant and their whole life falls apart. And they didn't even know there was a problem because they were burying it the whole time. And that's what I'm trying to prevent.
Okay. So, how can one recognize that you're in danger of these subconscious or unconscious problems and that they are having a toll on your life, but you're not recognizing it? What can one do to start to identify and become more self aware of those criteria?
So basically, there's the people that feel bad but are successful. And so they measure their success by the fact of their external world. So then they ignore how they feel. Or there's people that feel okay but aren't actually outwardly successful. So it's kind of like it really depends on whether you have more traumas, more limiting beliefs, how that kind of manifests. But the people that are outwardly successful, probably the biggest message for them is that you're not actually living. You think you're living because you have a nice house, you have a nice car, you have money, you have a family, you have all of this stuff that society says is success, but there's something wrong inside. And you know there's something wrong inside, but you just can't quite put your finger on it. And you keep trying to like go get more stuff outside to distract yourself from this conversation inside of you that there's a real problem. Like you're hurt, you're hurting, you're wounded, like you actually need to fix that. So that's like the outwardly successful people. And then there's like the people that are like totally content, totally happy. They sell all their possessions, become a hippie type of thing, and then they like never actually accomplish anything because it's not that they don't want to, it's that their beliefs say that they can't. And so they kind of regress into this smaller box of who they are. It kind of manifests in different ways. But as we were talking about, the number one, the start to the path of healing is just self-awareness. Like, who are you actually? What do you really want? And then what is not in alignment with that?
Again, it's a really crucial question that we need to ask, which is what matters most. And
Mhm.
more often than not, I see people consistently focused on extrinsic factors that they borrowed because they see other people doing it and they think it's important. And they're miserable. They burn through two or three spouses, they're estranged from their kids, they're lonely, and they burn out and they have their first heart attack in their early 40s or late 40s or early 50s. And it's not a great existence. Because I come back to those three fundamentals. As human beings, we seem to want choice, to feel like what we're doing has purpose. And the greatest purpose that as human beings we tend to feel is by serving the relationships that matter to us. And we don't spend anywhere near enough time in self reflection, and we're certainly not asking ourselves good enough questions. Again, I'm going to give credit to my pal Antonio Garrido for this wonderful question. When you see your sales team isn't performing, are you asking yourself this question? Did we hire them this way or did we make them this way? Because before you start pointing the finger of blame anywhere, look in the mirror. If your customers are not buying, yet there are people in your market who are selling, then you have to look in the mirror. If your relationships at home aren't working, the first place to look is the mirror. So we've got to start asking ourselves questions like, well, what really matters? If I had a year where money was no object and I could do anything and everything I wanted in life, what would I choose to do? Okay, now I've only got 6 months, unlimited budget, but now I've only got 3 months, unlimited budget. Well, what really matters? What would be the things that you would want? And interestingly enough, it's never about the accumulation of stuff. It's always about experiences, relationships, growth, contribution, legacy. And it's the intrinsic value that really matters. So, in terms of healing, how important is understanding what is intrinsically important?
It's absolutely important because everything I do, as I mentioned earlier, my definition of limiting belief is anything that is contrary to your will, which means that your will is supreme, right? Like if you want to do something and you're held back from doing it, you're not living the life that you want to be living, right? Whether it's a small thing, a big thing, a different thing, doesn't matter because you're not being genuine with yourself. You're not being who you are, who you were meant to be, and you're living someone else's life that you think that they're happy, but maybe they're just as miserable as you. So now you're just imitating misery. It kind of reminded me of something I heard about, like if you keep asking people questions, they don't actually have a self identity. They only have an identity in relation to other people. Like, who are you? Oh, well, I'm me. Well, who is me, right? Well, I'm my mom's son, or I'm my brother's brother, or whatever, right? And so it's like you don't exist in a vacuum. And so what you have to do is really get in touch with who you are, like for the first time in your life. Like as you said, no limitations, don't even worry about money, just like what do you actually want, like really, like truly want, because that's probably different than the life that you're living. And then what relationships do you want to be having, right? Because everything is ourself in relation to other people. You've got to get clear on that, and unless you're clear on that, then there's no way you can heal because you don't even know what healing looks like.
Interesting. Okay. So, one of the challenges that I see repeatedly coming back to haunt organizations and individuals is the attempt to try and control things that they have no control over, and the failure to accept what is. And the net result of that is that they then end up being terribly attached to things not working out how they want them to. Then they go full Karen and complain and blame everyone else. And okay. So, how do we get people to recognize that every decision that they have made in life at some point, whether it was unconscious or not, was a choice that their brain made? And many of those choices, they will have very little deliberate control over. But the few that they do give them enormous advantage. But by and large, like you said, they just accept that this is the way things are. You see it in terms of people limiting themselves, saying, well, who am I to? Well, who are you not to? But I know there's a point in here somewhere. And I get the sense that if we reflect and we ask a decent question of ourselves each week, and we spend some real quality time in deep thought, that slowing down process will help us identify the stuff that doesn't matter. So we can stop doing that and free up time to do the stuff that does. How do you teach your clients to use reflection and questions?
So the biggest question there is, who am I? Because we often think of, what do I want? What do I want to do? What do I want to have? All of this kind of external based stuff, but we don't actually know who we are. And so once we understand who we truly are, and not what society tells us, not what we've told ourselves, not what our family has told us, not any of this stuff, but like just sit in reflection and experience yourself for the first time. Right? It's almost like starting a relationship with yourself, because you've never actually talked to yourself before. Like me, I have two Facebook profiles. I'm not even friends with myself, right? It's kind of like that inside of ourselves, right? It's like we exist inside of ourselves, but we don't have any contact with ourselves at all. We're completely external focused. So just sit in silence, not judgment, sit in conversation, just start talking with yourself and get to know yourself. You are a person, just like a relationship. So start a relationship with yourself. Just treat yourself as a person and figure out who you are. And then everything else comes about because of that. Because if I am the type of person that just wants to be content with where I'm at, and I don't need billions of dollars, and I don't need, private jets and all of this stuff to be happy, then that's who I am. But it's when we pursue something that's not who we are, then that creates all of that problem. So just learn who you are. Like it's not going to happen overnight, but just start that conversation and see what you have to say.
And that could not be better advice for a salesperson, because what I see time and time again is people trying to turn up and then employ a playbook, a methodology, a system. And it doesn't sound like them. As a result, it's technique, it's weaponizing a tactic. The best advice I can give to any human being is turn up and just be a decent human being. Human beings are social primates. By and large, we have a network that can grow up to about 150 people before our brain starts to frazzle. So we have close working relationships with an in group. If we understand that we can go further faster with the cooperation of others, and with them holding our feet to the fire and holding up the mirror, because if we really care about each other, do we let each other get hurt, do stupid things? We don't. Gallup did some fascinating research, and they came up with the 12 questions. And I think it's question 5 or 7 is, do you have a best friend at work? And everyone takes that question out. But the reason it's the most important question is, if you have a best friend at work, the best friend doesn't let you do something stupid, doesn't let you get hurt. And it was particularly poignant in a Mexican smelting plant. And they had about 120 injuries a year. They had fatalities and everything else. When they implemented that and they prioritized, do you have a best friend at work, deaths and injuries went to 0. Now, if we employ the same thinking, most economists have employed game theory. And game theory says that we will betray each other in order to win out, because that's what the probability says is the best outcome. In practice, when you do it with nurses, when you do it with nice people, they don't rat each other out. They look after each other. They sacrifice themselves in order to help other people. And I think we're missing a huge trick here. If we stop trying to convince people, manipulate people, and we just turn up, and we're genuine, we're authentic, and we care, and we're ourselves, then the other person has no reason to perceive us as a threat. And over time, they can open up and we can open up and we can share confidences and be vulnerable.
Mm.
And then the perceived risk disappears. Well, That way, we're allies. I'm much more interested in finding a customer for life than a transaction. That way, I don't have to go out and do all that hard work over and over and over again. They bring me people. That's so much nicer. And it just strikes me that we need to think very differently, especially in tough times, because the choices we can make that we will make, actually, we're going to be in difficult situations where we have to make important decisions with limited information. And the consequences we might have to live with for a very long time. Other people may have to suffer. Well, I want to be prepared to make a good decision well in those circumstances. And you can't do that if your brain is switched off. And this is where game theory and all the idea of how people run businesses and economists is wrong. Human beings, when push comes to shove, don't behave in the way that the models tell you. How do we tap into that incredible superpower? Because I look at the resilience that human beings have when they're under pressure, the incredible creativity. If only you give it the opportunity to have a voice, give it oxygen instead of stifling it. How do we create those conditions in our work?
There is a formula that I use that I believe encompasses everything that we're about as human beings. And it may be similar to what you've heard, maybe completely different, but I believe it's probably the most important formula that you'll ever hear, which is I call it the divine conduit formula. You can, debate the name on it, but step one is give unto others even when you don't have yourself. And then step two is take what you need for yourself, but nothing more. And if you follow that to the letter and not your own, everyone has their own interpretation of how they hear things, but word for word, if you actually follow that, it's very different than the golden rule that everyone follows, which is like, treat others how you want to be treated. It doesn't work, right? Because nobody treats, you that way, then you get left out. So you actually have to take what you need, but you don't want to take so much that it hurts other people. But in order to actually start this wheel rolling, you actually have to give when you don't even have yourself. And that doesn't mean give to the point of taking away from yourself, because you're not giving of yourself. This formula is exactly how I became a mindset coach and invented these like world changing methodologies, even though I had no clue what I was doing, because I was trying to help someone even when I didn't know how. I basically got the methodology to do that from following this formula, and it works every time. So you're not lowering yourself, you're actually creating into the world something that was not there before.
And again, this philosophy aligns very closely with the approach that we're taking, which is that I see most other sales methodologies are really about trying to ratchet up the pain, create pressure, and to serve the self. As a buyer, I don't want to be closed. I don't want to be handled. I don't want to be funneled. I don't want to be convinced. I want an ally. As an employee, I want someone in management who helps me grow and develop and do my best work. I want to come and do important, meaningful work with other people who are doing important, meaningful work, and we all grow together. That makes for real engagement. It means that I want to give massive discretionary effort. But instead, what we've done is we've created this factory where human beings are churned through it and turned over in the pursuit of short term objectives, which don't really align with people's values. And I think this is one of the things that really has troubled me the last few years, that ethics on an MBA program is probably about a 3 hour module out of $100,000. And on LinkedIn, the only posts I've seen about sales ethics pretty much have been written by me. When we get to a point where ethical behavior is considered to be an inconvenience, it's something to be glossed over. That begs the question, if you really want to make a profitable business, why would you make it so hard for yourself? So, again, what would you say to leaders who are going into this economic period, which is likely to last probably 6 to 8 years and be pretty tough if the pattern is being repeated. And people like Warren Buffett, Robert Reich, Gary Stevenson are right. Then the whole system is coming to a very, very unpleasant impasse. And in all probability, we may well be at war within a year. There's even talk that World War III started in space and cyberspace between China and the US years ago. Your thoughts?
So the system is broken, but the system is a symptom of our principles as a society. And our principles as a society is a symptom of our experiences. And, underneath all of that is our beliefs. And in this specific case, the belief that underlies all of that is that you can either be a good person or you can make a lot of money. And so when you have to choose between the two, which one are you going to do, right? Do you want to be broke and happy, or do you want to actually pull your life forward? Well, most people are going to choose to pull their life forward because we have our survival instinct that trips our survival instinct. So the reality is, as evidenced by what you do, how effective your methodology is based on ethics and principles and morality and relationships is for them to realize is that being a good person is what leads them to make the money that they want to make. So it's actually make money and be a good person, or be a terrible person and hurt people, and then short-term gain, and then everything falls apart. So that's actually the real dichotomy, is not what people think it is.
And this is where we need to ask this question: who will pay the negative price for my positive payoff? If I take this decision, who's going to have to pay the price for it? And more often than not, it's the people we care about. It's our customers. And I have a fundamental belief that we have no right to cause harm. And if my making a sale requires me to lie, why would I sell it? If my making the sale requires me to put you under pressure to buy something you don't need, I think that suggests a really broken values system. Because in my experience, you don't need to put people under pressure if you simply do one shift, which is you move your focus from short-term pipeline to medium-term pipeline. And instead of trying to sell during that passive looking phase, you try and empower and educate and engage. So when they move from passive to active looking, you are the only show in town because everyone else is trying to make a transaction happen. And yes, revenue is important, but you have a strategy that is focused on delivering the relationships, and you're focused on the inputs, not the outcomes, because you have control over some of the inputs. You have no control over when or who or how much they sign for. Excellent. Jed, we've come to time more or less. Tell me this. If you had a golden ticket and you could go back and change one thing or whisper in the ear of your 23-year-old idiot self that knew everything, was immortal, invincible, and always right, and would have ignored you, what would be that one bit of advice?
It's interesting because that immortal, invincible self was actually opposite of who I was at the 23-year-old mark, which is like right when I turned 24 is right when that trauma happened that totally destroyed my life. And so actually my problem was the opposite of what you're saying. So my problem was that I did not trust myself, right? I put my focus on trusting people that and belief systems that did not serve me, that were actively trying to harm me. And so if I could go back and change anything, I would have told myself, trust yourself. And it's interesting because our immediate thought is, well, I already trust myself. I'm confident. I'm not talking about confidence. I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm not talking about self-serving. I'm talking about trusting your higher self, that part of you that I was talking about earlier of who am I, not who you think you are, who you actually are. And when you actually realize that's who you are, and when you start trusting that, your whole life will turn around.
Absolutely. Jed, how can people get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is on Facebook. Don't look for my profile, look for the Mysteries of the Mind. It's my Facebook group. That's basically kind of the hub of everything that I'm doing right now, because I don't really accept friend requests on Facebook, which I'll fix at some point, I'm sure. But if you can find that group, the Mysteries of the Mind, it's free Facebook group. That's the best way. I am also on Facebook as a profile. I also have a LinkedIn, both under my name. But the best place to guarantee that you'll actually, be able to interact with me is that group.
Excellent. Jed Thomas, thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. It was a pleasure being here.
So this is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you'd like to work out what matters most, I've created a series of questions that you can work on your own. So DM me or email me, marcus@laughs-last.com. And remind me, just put what matters most PDF, and then I'll remember, because I've got thousands of these things. Main thing, though, is pipeline certainty leads to revenue certainty. If you would like to create the conditions in your business as a seller, as a manager, as a leader, a founder, where you have a certain pipeline, where you know how much revenue will come in and when, then drop me a line. And there is a link on the bottom of the blurb here, which will take you to my selling aptitude test. It will give you 3 scores when we speak: your selling aptitude, your pipeline certainty, and your buyer safety score. So it will inform you what you are doing to sabotage your own sales and what you can do in the next 30 days so that in the next 90 days, you have cash in the bank. If that's something that you'd like to do, click the link and I shall speak to you soon. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.